Hello, and welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter and on Instagram at Hawk Blogger. And we are back with what is quickly becoming one of people's favorite parts of their week, the vaunted, the legendary, maybe, I don't know, the crossover pod roundtable of Griffin Sturgeon at C Mike Spin Move on Twitter, Rob Staton at Rob Staton. We got the Seattle Overload podcast. We've got Seahawks Draft Blog. We got whatever the heck I am, and the whole crew together to talk a little bit more about the Seahawks today, and specifically a debate that I think it's a little bit more, there's a little more to it than maybe some people, but we're going to find out. We're going to find out together. So let me bring in the guys. Griff, it sounds like you got some plans for this sunny Sunday in Seattle. You going to get outside, enjoy the weather?
Yeah, gonna go out on a hike. Hopefully I run into some wildlife, snap pictures of, hoping for a bear. We'll settle for a bobcat. We'll see.
Wait a second. Pause for a second. So you are a photography enthusiast? Is this something you just like to do?
No, I've just had this string of luck recently where on my hikes and nature walks, I keep running into like rare-ish wildlife.
Oh, okay. And then, and then you hope for a bear. See, this is the thing. I've been hiking a lot lately, and I'm like increasingly like, okay, I'm going to run into a bear or a mountain lion on my single hikes with my little dog, and I'm going to have to probably feed my dog to this bear to get away. I don't know.
I mean, interactions with black bears are very tame. I mean, not to be too cavalier, but they see you and they just walk away or run away. I've even ran into them with their cubs, and they're just like, whatever, human, I guess, and they just wander off. It's been very anticlimactic every time. One time I ran into a cougar, but it was already running away from me by the time I saw it. I interrupted it feeding on its kill, and that was the only time I've seen a cougar on trail.
We're going to Banff up in Canada. We're going to go to Glacier, and then we're going to go to Banff and Lake Louise, and there are no shortage of grizzlies up there. So I keep getting these in my TikTok feed, these massive grizzly sightings, and I'm like, we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, I'm good with black bears, but anything larger than that, I'm good. I'm good. So,
Rob, how about you? Are you an outdoor guy? Do you get outside and hike, or what's your hobby, your dominant hobby outside of this?
No, I'm not much of a hiker, and I would absolutely shat myself if I saw a bear. Absolutely. No, I must admit, aside from work, I'm a bit of a workaholic, so I kind of just do a day job and then this. But any time I can spend time with my kids. So, but the wildlife that we bumped into today when I was with my daughter were basically just cows and pigs. So, because she's 7, so that was about as daring as I wanted to be today. And if I saw a bear, I'd be doing my best DK Metcalf impression, trying to chase down Arizona Cardinals defensive back.
Yeah. Do not do that, Rob. We'd like to make sure you stay with us. You do not want to trigger their chase reflex. But Griff, I don't know if that was surprising to you to hear that Rob at like midnight or 1 a.m. or whatever time it is for him is a workaholic. Does that surprise you?
Not at all. I don't know how you guys on that time zone are living in like 3 different time zones at all times. I don't know your guys' sleep schedule. I commend you.
The preseason games are the best because they kick off at like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, and you have to be a real sado to stay up or wake up for those. And I do it every year. And every time I wake up, I think, "What are you doing, man?"
Well, yes, I'm awake at sometimes in the middle of the night, but I'm certainly not podcasting at that point. So, the focus of this conversation is which side of the ball is most improved. But before we even get there, there is a premise that's built on, a foundational premise that there is going to be improvement. And so I want to have that conversation first, guys, because there are guys on my crew, my podcast crew, Evan, Jeff said it at times, that they're kind of anticipating or bracing for a step back season. And so I want to go hear from each of you first. Are you expecting a step back season for the Seahawks, or are you expecting this team to be better than it was last year holistically? We don't have to get into we'll get into the sides of the ball and the specifics in the later part, but just generally, are you expecting a step back? Rob, let's start with you.
No, I'm not. I think that the fact that you have a rookie head coach is a good reason to think that maybe there could be some growing pains. Ditto the fact that you've got a rookie offensive coordinator and a rookie defensive coordinator, but the likes of Leslie Frazier in there offering some experience and some guidance, I think really important. So I think that everything is set up to have, I actually think, a better season than last year, because I wasn't a big fan of the coordinators they had last year. I think that Pete Carroll had run his course, and I think it was time for a fresh start. And I think that the people that they brought in, I'm incredibly convinced by Ryan Grubb and Macdonald, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see what they do. I think they've kicked themselves into 2024 with some of the way that their schemes that they're talking about. I think that the addition of Byron Murphy is somebody who could come in and do something that they've not had for an awful long time. I think that they had everything set up with their weapons offensively to be a much better offense than they were, and they didn't make the most of those weapons last year. I think they will this year. And I think defensively, you can only get better, given that they were an absolute shambles. I thought that Pittsburgh game was it was just a disgrace, frankly. And they've got to improve from there. I've absolutely no doubt whatsoever that they will. So I think there's a chance that this could be a 10-win team, and let's see where they go from there. I think quite a few people are actually sleeping on the Seahawks as a team that could make a bit of noise in a wide open NFC.
All right, so that's Rob. And Griff, I'm gonna preface this for you. Griff is one of the nicest people on Twitter, which is not something you hear from, like, no one's described as nice on Twitter generally. It's not a realm where that is. But I want to make sure, because I've seen you've been more tepid. So I want to make sure you feel very safe space to come in here and say you disagree. But give us your genuine take. What's your thought on where the Seahawks are going? Are they going to step back? Is that what people should be raced for, or is this team going to be better?
Well, first, regarding my Twitter behavior, I've definitely had my moments. I'm not my record isn't spotless there, but I think that they are. I don't think they're taking a step back in the aggregate. I mean, they were a winning team last year, a 9-win team. They were above 500, and that was a team that we all had, myself included, our misgivings with. So basically, we're looking at a 9-win team and saying that's underperformance, and that's something I agree with. I think that team had the potential to win 11, 12 games last year, and I really think the same thing about 2022. And I had pretty high expectations going into 2022. And I know that a lot of people thought they were going to be like a 5-win team. And I'm like, oh, I think they're going to be middle of the pack, maybe north of that. But so the only way I can foresee them taking a step back this year is not going to be due to like coaching incompetence or anything like that. Like, it won't be related to, well, Macdonald's not the right guy for the job, but more so, like Rob said, rookie head coach, and then the entire staff, like, no one has any context or background with each other. That's just going to open you up to a lot of variance. And there might be some, waves you have to ride, and that could lead to unforeseen things. And then I think 2025, they'll be full go and they'll be reaching their potential. But even with that said, I don't see them taking a step back in the aggregate. I think we should expect 10, 11 wins, maybe a wild card berth, and maybe win a playoff game. I think that should be the expectation. I mean, because we collectively decided that last year wasn't good enough. So, I mean, the expectations should be higher. Again, we have to give some grace period to the first year for everybody with the new staff. But the defense, I mean, all it takes is competence, a competent approach, competent holistic approach to go from, what were they, 30th overall in the aggregate for the whole season to approaching average. And frankly, for a period around week 8, they were ranked 10th in efficiency, and then they utterly nosedived. In my opinion, I think they're weaker in some areas, stronger in some areas, but on defense. But I think that they're more or less they have the same talent level. And so if you're taking what is the same talent level and the potential of that, which I think was maybe a fringe top 10 defense, and you're pairing that talent level with a competent coaching staff, you should be fighting for average at worst. I think the defensive unit should be average at minimum, really. So I definitely think that there's a lot of potential there. And then on offense, I differ from most in that I'm very high on Grubb. I just was also high on Waldron, and I have a lot of reasons for that. But I don't see Grubb necessarily as an upgrade, but that speaks more to what I think of Waldron. Like I think that just on an absolute level, I'm kind of with everyone else on Grubb that I think he's great. I just think Waldron was pretty good too, and that he like Gino was hamstrung with a lot of unfortunate realities and was doing his best to scheme around it. Not perfectly, but I think he did a decent job, all things considered. But so I see hiring Grubb as more like getting back to neutral at play caller, and the bigger inhibitors being what is the O-line going to allow the offensive coordinator to do or not do. But all in all, like those things, I mean, for all of our complaints about the offense last year, they still ended the season 10th in EPA. They were very efficient. And then not only that, the second half of the season, they were like 6th. I mean, they fixed their red zone problems in the second half of the season, at least in the Geno games. They fixed their third down problems. They fixed their yak problems. I mean, all these areas that they weren't doing well in the first half of the season, they ended up improving. So I'm thinking, okay, we'll take that momentum, carry that into the next season. If the O-line can be even better, then I mean, there's a world where they're a top 5 offense next year. I'm not going to hold a new staff to that, right? But I think the offense should absolutely be top 10. So if you take a roughly top 10 offense and say a bang average defense, you should be winning 10, 11 games. So,
Yeah. Well, we'll definitely get more into the details on the offense and the defense in a second. At the risk of, having everybody say the same thing, I'm going to make the case that they'll step back, and that it's coming from everyone that's listened to me knows I feel very strongly that this team should be expected to be better. That's my belief. That's why I got to which side's the ball most improved. But here's the case where I would just say to even out the conversation, I would say this. They really shouldn't have been a winning team last year. The Cardinals missed a kick. Like they absolutely should have lost that game 10 different ways. That's one. They had the most game-winning drives, comebacks in the NFL. That also is, hanging your hat on close wins is, from a variance perspective, not good idea and not great. They could have very easily lost to the Titans. They did lose to the Steelers. They definitely could have lost to the Browns. They could have lost even to the Panthers early in the year. Was a game that they were like, that was a questionable game for a little while. And, the Lions game went their way. So there were a lot of things, the Commanders game. So there wasn't a lot of situations where you're like, okay, this team is strong, and this team, put them up against this group and they're going to win. Pretty much every game you had reason to have question whether the Seahawks were going to win that game. And they enter this season being favored, entering the season, for fewer games than only a couple other teams are favored in fewer games than the Seahawks this year, heading into the season. So all that, plus the fact I would throw in there, new head coach who's never done it before, new offensive coordinator who's never been in the NFL before, new offensive line coach who's never been in the NFL before, new defensive coordinator who's never done defensive coordinating before, a new special teams coach who's never been in the NFL. Like, they've never coached together. Like, all these things, there's a lot of reasons to say, yeah, let's give them some grace year one. So for me, it's not like they have to be great this year or this is a total bust of a direction. But I can see where they'd take a step back. But that's not how I feel. I feel very much the way you two feel. I think that there's reasons to expect, and we'll talk about these in a second, why it's more about a conversation about how much better they can be versus whether they're going to be worse. Rob, you look like you're going to say something.
Yeah, can I just? Do you know what? I thought the thing that we did last week was quite enlightening. To actually to force you to study the other teams in the NFC West, because I mean, I don't know about you two, but I kind of felt after that experience that I was in a bit of a Seahawks bubble, that I knew what the Seahawks had
Mm-hmm.
And I knew the top players that the Rams, for example, or the Niners had, but didn't really look at the roster as a whole. And when I'm having to go down and create a big board, like an NFL draft board, all of a sudden I was noticing things that I'd not really picked up on. And I looked at it and I genuinely thought, yeah, the Niners have got star power and that's obvious. That's why they've been getting to Super Bowls and having the success that they've had. But short of that, I don't think the Seahawks are a million miles behind. They've actually got quite a depth of talent. They just need some of those really good players to become great players.
Mm-hmm.
And look, my personal opinion over the last few years was that I just think things went a bit stale under the head coach, under Carroll, and that really the team would play in fits and starts, that it was capable because of the talent to have a game like against the Lions whenever they play the Lions, frankly, because they seem to have their number. And there were other times where they would play very, very well. But then a good example is I've traveled 5,000 miles to watch them play the Niners on Thanksgiving Day. And the opening drive of that game, it was as if Kyle Shanahan had got the Seahawks headset on by mistake and knew exactly what they were calling on defense. And it was so predictable. And they anticipated every single thing the Seahawks were doing so early in that game, to the point that at halftime I was thinking, it's cold. I might as well just go back to the hotel and have an old fashioned. It did feel a little bit that way. And now I just think that with Macdonald coming in, undoubtedly there's going to be growing pains. Undoubtedly there will be a game at some point where he probably makes a call. I mean, I think he did it in the playoff game against the Chiefs, quite frankly. He called cover zero, I think, on like the game-winning play. And I remember thinking at the time, that's a mistake. And he may well have a call like that loses the Seahawks a game, and he will learn from it. There'll be moments like that, and Grubb will have those moments as well. But I think in totality, I think this staff will help elevate the clear talent that the Seahawks have on their roster to a higher level, and that will enable them, even if they do drop a couple of games that they probably shouldn't, I think, to be quite convincing in the games they should win. I've always felt like Carroll's Seahawks in the recent years kind of played down a little bit to the poorer teams. And I think against the Rams and the Niners, it'll just be a very different experience. They might not win all of those games. They probably won't. But I think it'll be a very different game between Macdonald and McVay and Macdonald and Shanahan than it had become with Carroll losing every game to Shanahan and losing most of the games to McVay.
Yeah. Yeah, well said, Rob. Before we then transition in talking about which side of the ball we think is most improved, I do want to ask folks, if you can, give the show a like and click subscribe. It's great to have people. We're having the community's growing, and don't just like and subscribe here. Head over to the Seattle Overload podcast. They've got a channel on YouTube. Subscribe, and you'll get Griff and Maddie for their conversations on all the stuff that's going on there from a film study perspective. And then you've got Rob and the Seattle Draft blog, as well as his YouTube channel. So make sure you go there and subscribe as well. So there's tons of great content coming out, and it's a nice, easy, free way to show some appreciation for the guys spending their time on this. So, all right. So the basic premise here is, I've been listening to all sorts of stuff, like all sorts of interviews, press conferences, been doing a bunch of research. And I think the general perception coming in is, okay, Mike Macdonald is the head coach. He's a defensive mastermind. He's the number one defensive coach right now from a popularity or brand perspective in the league. And the Seahawks have a really bad defense last year. And so the defense is going to be the thing that's most improved. But then if you really are paying attention, the part of the team that is getting the most conversation right now in terms of superlatives, it is the offensive side of the ball. It is people talking about how well Geno Smith is playing. It is people talking about plays from Ryan Grubb that they haven't seen before, or a offensive scheme that is new and different to the NFL, or the amount of diversity. If you heard Tariq Woolen and that it's got him speechless. And then, if you heard George Fant on Ian Furness talking about this running back room being special and being like that really stands out to him. And you've got an offensive line. There's a bunch of things here that I think at least make it a worthwhile conversation about, are we sure the defense is going to be the most improved? And I don't even know, for example, what Rob and Griff think about this, but that's why I wanted to ask this question. And I can sprinkle in some stats and will do so throughout, but I'll at least give you these numbers to start with. These are the basic numbers, not the advanced metrics with EPA and some of the other stuff. But in terms of scoring, the Seahawks were 17th in the NFL in scoring last year on offense. They were 25th on defense in points allowed. They were 21st in the NFL on offense in yards per game. They were 30th in the NFL in yards per game on defense. They were on yards per play. They were actually 10th in the NFL on offense, and they were 25th on defense. So just to give you, there's one number in there that's top 10, but generally you're talking bottom half of the league in terms of the basic metrics, not the advanced metrics. So, Griff, let's start with you. Do you, in your mind, is it pretty clear which side of the ball is going to be most improved this year?
To me, it would be defense. Yeah. I think both units improve. I just think that there's just simply more room for improvement on defense. I think on offense, it's more marginal and more in certain areas, and not like holistic, like full scale type stuff. Yeah.
Rob, how about you? What's your basic expectation coming in?
Sorry, for
which side of the ball do you think is your expectation is most improved?
Oh, I think without a shadow of a doubt, the defense. I think absolutely it is the defense. Macdonald took over something that I was trying to find the numbers then. I think it was something like the 29th worst defense in the NFL when he became defensive coordinator with the Ravens. I think he went up to 8th and then 1st in 2 years. And this is not wishful thinking. I genuinely believe we are going to see a jump of that magnitude.
Yeah, when I was doing the show a while ago on the track record of young coaches in the NFL, and people might remember Sean McVay in his first year, he took over an offense that was ranked 32nd in the NFL, and in his first year had the first ranked offense. So I don't know if it's realistic to expect that kind of jump, but it's happened. It's not unprecedented for that to happen. Well, let's talk about the defense for a second. For me, it's not as clear, and I can go into some of my reasons about why as we break it down. But I also will say that the difference between, I don't think that the difference between 30th and 15th in the league is equivalent to the improvement from, or I don't think that's as valuable or meaningful of a jump as moving from 10th or 15th to top 5 in either side. And so I think it's like, it's a curve, I guess. Sure. And there's kind of an exponential aspect to this. And so when I think about the potential of the offense becoming a legitimate top 5 group, maybe higher than that, that would represent a much more meaningful improvement than going from 30th to middle of the road. So that's where I think there's some more debate to be had. So let's talk about the defense for a second, and let's look at this objectively. What's the case, since we all agree it's going to be better? What's the case where we're a little more hesitant? What's keeping us from saying this is going to be, a 30th to top 5 kind of situation? What are the question marks? Griff, why don't you start with this one?
What's keeping them from being bad again, or what's
keeping them from being like significantly improved? What are the potential obstacles to this defense making a big jump?
Well, so Macdonald's tenure in Baltimore was short-lived but awesome, right? As a defensive coordinator. It should be emphasized, though, the first 8 games of 2022 in Baltimore, the Ravens, at least by EPA and DVOA, were as bad as the Seahawks were this past season, the final 8-9 games of the season. And then only 2 things change. Only 2 material things change. They trade for Roquan Smith, and then they double Kyle Hamilton's snap count, and then they skyrocket to like 4th over the final 2 games of the season, and it averages out to like they're like 8th or 10th, like Rob said, in 2022. Then they carry that momentum into 2023, and they're like bona fide, one of the best defenses of the last 10 years, right? But I emphasize that to say that it's like that whole, like, you can be greater than the sum of your parts, you can be worse than the sum of your parts, or you can just be the sum of your parts, right? I don't know, like, for Macdonald, if you were to ask him, like, what were you guys missing? Like, Roquan Smith himself isn't the difference between being a bottom 5 D. If that were true, then Chicago wouldn't have been bottom 5 when they traded for him. But Roquan was also on a top 5 defense in 2018 in Chicago. So it's certain players are like schematic linchpins that allow you to call certain plays that perhaps other players can perform well in. What I have a hard time looking at Seattle right now, even though I think they're as talented as they were last year, the talent distribution is such that I think it's going to be difficult for Macdonald to lean on certain players the way that he would want to maximize the surrounding players. That's where I have huge question marks about how he's going to scheme. I don't think we see the Ravens scheme. I really think we see more of an aggressive, like, he's going to be rushing 5 and 6 instead of rushing 4 and 5. And the reason for that is that will make the middle of the defense less important coverage wise. And thus you're offsetting that by compensating with the one-on-one coverage talent of his cornerbacks. That doesn't just mean calling cover 1 all day. I mean, you can get more one-on-one techniques within your zone calls, but he'll just need to live in those areas of the field more. So I think it's contingent, at least on year 1, it's contingent on him kind of being more like Wink Martindale schematically with his execution, and less like Mike Macdonald was in 2022 and 2023. I mean, I don't think you can just copy paste that scheme with this personnel. I think it would be a disaster, to be completely honest with you. Tyrell Dodson can't do what Roquan Smith does. I mean, maybe if you move Baker to Mike, but therefore I think he knows that though. So therefore I think he'll tweak the scheme around. I think the main thing that will improve them though is just the actual hands-on coaching aspect. When Seattle utterly fell apart last year, they started pulling out like the in case of emergency calls, like, all right, we're going to load the box, we're going to put 5 bodies on the line of scrimmage. If this doesn't stuff the run, nothing will. We're going to slant the line, and they're still not defending anything. Individual players that are talented are losing leverage on their blocks. They're not staying disciplined in their run fit. It's like Bobby Wagner knows how to fit the run behind a 5-man underfront, and he's backdooring stuff. Like, why is that happening? Clearly there's some sort of like system failure going on over the course of the practice week. It's not like this is a lack of X and O acumen from the coaches. It's not like a lack of whiteboard knowledge. It's not even necessarily a lack of effort from the players. It's just they're not working cohesively. So you can only point to subjective things. That's where Macdonald, I think, his year 1 contributions, the most important ones, are going to be like, regardless of what's being called, the player on the field, all 11 are going to be playing to their potential. The floor is going to raise significantly. So it's just kind of like general across the board competence. I think the floor will rise. They'll be like 20th at worst. It's more so, what does the ceiling look like in year 1? And that's where I think it's the talent distribution. I think is what will prevent them from being like maybe better than 20th. That's provided if he doesn't tweak the scheme. So, yeah,
that's helpful, Rob. When I think about it, I guess for me it is depth. Like linebacker, if there's an injury there, if there's 2 injuries there, you're rolling out the guys that I'm not sure really should be on the field. I think there's potential, at safety, if there's injury situations there, you might feel a little bit concerned about depth there. Or maybe some people have questions about even the talent of the people that are slated to be starters there. But the linebacker position for sure. And then edge rush is something that has not really proven itself out yet for the Seahawks. There's been some things that there, but are those the things that come up for you as the limiting factors, or are there other things that we haven't brought up?
The depth, without a shadow of a doubt. I mean, if they have to line up, let's say, John Rattigan at linebacker, you would go into any game concerned about that. That would be a talking point all week. If Tyrese Knight and John Rattigan were your two linebackers, everybody would be discussing that on the radio, online, on social media. So that is a big thing. But I think that really is it for me. I think everything else, I really like the fact that Mike Macdonald has come out numerous times and said, we are going to tailor everything to the players that we've actually got. And they haven't just gone to try and mimic the Ravens. If they'd have tried to do that, I think they would have forced personnel decisions. I thought it was incredibly, I thought impressive that they didn't just go out and sign ex-Ravens or players from that scheme to fill holes to try and recreate things. They've kind of built the defense quite differently to the Ravens, and now seem to be with the idea of tailoring it towards what they've got. You know, we've heard Joe Klatt talk about the importance of a run wall. Well, Seattle's run defense has been really poor, you know, for quite some time. And then you go and add Jonathan Hankins and Byron Murphy, you re-sign Leonard Williams. I absolutely loved the resource spend on the defensive line. And, you know, for me, yeah, the linebacker depth is a real concern, but I think it's like a tiny little blemish compared to sort of just the love that I just love to see teams dominating the trenches. When I look at Seattle's defensive interior right now, I think for years it was a question mark. It was definitely a question mark going into training camp a year ago. And now I think, wow, like they have got everything they need to shut down the run. And then I think you play off that a little bit. So I think Devin Witherspoon's role is going to, I think it's going to be a really creative role. I don't think he's just going to be a cornerback in this scheme. I'm really fascinated to see what they do with him. And I wonder if he won't be Kyle Hamilton, but we might end up talking about Devin Witherspoon as in the same kind of sense. Like teams will want a player that can do a lot of different things like he can. And then with the edge rushers, I thought it was really fascinating that I apologize to the player because I'm just used to calling him by the name he was referring to himself during the draft. But Jason Owe, I know he's switched names since, but they drafted him in the first round and he didn't really do much of anything until last season. And I think he had a real high PFF grade last year playing in this system. So while everybody talked about Jadeveon Clowney and Cal Van Noy within that scheme, Owe also had a really good year. I do wonder if a Boy MFA, even a Derek Hall, or a Darrell Taylor, for that matter, could have a real jump under Mike Macdonald. And I think having Uchenna and Nwosu back is going to be a real thing. I would not be surprised if one of those players has a really big year. So although we don't have that dominant edge, I think one of these players could play really well within the scheme. And then the fact that he got Madubuike to have such a sensational year. And a lot of that, if you speak to Ravens fans, they feel like it was very clever tactically to try and get him into positions to have that success. But I'm really interested to see how is he going to tactically get Leonard Williams and Byron Murphy and maybe even Jaron Reed into those situations. Plus, they've got a great rotation now to keep those guys fresh. It felt like Reed was playing every snap for a period last year, and now they're going to be able to keep these players fresh. I'm just so excited about this. So the holes, you know, the depth, maybe even at safety as well as linebacker, to me is not so much a concern as the real strengths of the defense, which I think have been bolstered superbly.
Yeah, I don't know about you guys. I don't know that I guess I went into last season thinking that cornerback could be a strength of the team, but it was still unproven. We didn't know what we had in Devin Witherspoon. We had a good idea, but we hadn't seen it yet. And Trey Brown was coming off kind of a down year and needing to show up. So I guess for me this year, the thing that I want to see first, and I believe they're in position to do, is to start with this notion of stopping the run. And if I know from an analytics standpoint, from a strategic standpoint, a lot of people are like, the running game is not that important, focus on the passing game. But if you've watched the Seahawks for the last few years, if you can run effectively against a team, then you've pretty much owned them. Like you can control the game. And so it might not be the sexiest thing, but if you can't stop a team from doing that, then your chances of winning, I feel like, are significantly reduced. And so I look at it this year. I look at all the things Rob just mentioned on the defensive line. Hankins playing nose tackle instead of Reed, being asked to play a gap, which he hasn't done for most of his career. He did it okay, but it wasn't great. Asking, Cam Young to kind of step up. He did whatever he could do as a rookie. Having a lot of snaps for Darrell Taylor as a base down edge player, even before Uchenna Nwosu went out. He was getting those snaps. People forget Mafe was not the starter last year. It was Darrell Taylor when they went into the year, and he was just a disaster against the run. And there's a lot of these things. So now you have my current belief, and again, people push back on this, but my current belief based on all the stars I'm putting together is that Draymond Jones is going to be a base down edge player and play a little bit more of the Jadeveon Clowney role. He's a bigger dude and has a better chance to holding up. Maffe's not bad against the run, but I think Draymond Jones is a step even above that. I think Jaron Reed at an end position and Leonard Williams at an end position and Jonathan Hankins in the middle is a very strong run defense at all those positions. And then Uchenna Nwosu at the other edge is already a strong run defender. And then Tyrell Dodson is a good run fit kind of backer. So I do believe that they are better situated. And in addition to that, they brought in good tacklers. The safeties they brought in are sound tacklers. And that was something that honestly, this is something Griff and I, probably see a little differently. Like Quandre Diggs was not a good tackler. And I think Griff acknowledges that or has, but it just doesn't think it's as important. For me, I felt like when people even broke through the line, there wasn't a lot of resistance past the linebacker crew to bring anyone down. And so there's a lot of big plays against this team last year. So I do feel like there's a lot of reasons to feel positively about them just being significantly better against the run than they were last year. Does that Griff, does that align with your perspective?
Yeah. I do have a lot of thoughts there, but generally, yes. I mean, I would go as far to say, I think the Seahawks right now going to 2024 have more talent on their D-line than the Ravens did last year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Baker and Dodson are competent run defenders. They're not Roquan and Queen, but like as far as it relates to the run, like they have a decent second level defending the run. They absolutely should be. What will always fascinate me is that, I mean, just the dichotomy. So last year, weeks 1 through 8, I'm looking at it right now, weeks 1 through 8, the Seahawks gave up 3.6 yards per carry. That ranked tied for third last year, to the first half of the season. Then weeks 9 through 18, they're giving up 5.2. Just neutrally, from a neutral objective perspective, it's so weird to go from so good to so bad. It's strange. It should also be noted, though, like just to like temper or like just to keep in the back of our minds, the Ravens last year, weeks 1 through 8 or whatever, they gave up like 4.1 yards per carry, and then from then on it was also like 4.8 or something. So they also had a pretty big regression. I think though that more speaks to their collective, I mean, how they fit the run, like what the structure is, 4 guys in line of scrimmage, 2 high shell. I think it more speaks to how that defensive philosophy, like it's really hard to defend the run out of a 2 high shell. Like Brian, you were saying earlier, like the run defense doesn't matter as much. And while that's true, it's like it can't be taken for granted. It didn't matter. That regression for Baltimore last year didn't matter because their pass defense sustained, remains so good. But when they come into the NFC West, I mean, I really believe that, with how many gaps Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay introduced to the line of scrimmage, I really think he's going to need to put more bodies on the line of scrimmage and play, like readjust his front structure a little bit. And I'm excited to see how he does that. But there's going to have to be some change, though. But I believe that Macdonald will respond to, even though they dominated the 49ers, McCaffrey had like 8 yards per carry that game.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I am curious to see how he addresses that, because I believe 1,000% he's got a plan, and he's going to show some like evolution too. But I'm very curious.
Can I interrupt for a second just to inject like one piece of data here?
Yeah.
So I think if I counted this up right, 12 out of the 17 games, the Seahawks gave up over 100 yards rushing. And they gave up over 136 yards rushing in their last 7 straight games to close the season, 7 in a row. And in, 6 of those 7, they gave up over 160 yards rushing. They gave up over 200 yards rushing 3 times last year, including both of their final 2 games, one against the Arizona Cardinals. So this is just, I think this is so crucial. And I actually want to flip to talk about the other side of the ball, because I think there's a story here as well. where when I've talked about Pete Carroll losing touch with his core philosophy over the years, this is it. He talked about running being the thing that closes the circle of toughness and being a core part of controlling the game. They lost complete control of run defense, and I think they were a relatively ineffective run offense for a number of years. And so I'm really like, this is a key focus. If they can be just better in this way, I have a lot more confidence about their ability to be successful in the passing game on both sides of the ball. Is that ring true for you, Rob?
100%. That's it. And I think that's why they've made the decisions that they have. I think that's why they've taken a defensive tackle. I think it's why, you've seen all the reports, and Brady was saying it, that they were interested in, if he was available, a 360-pound offensive lineman as an alternative. I think that is what they want to do. I think that's their determination. And I think on the defense, I think Mike Macdonald has probably got in there and saying, listen, if there was one thing holding us back last year, it was that run defense. And they didn't defend the run very well against the Rams or the Niners. So that is a special feature for them. And I think that they've gone out and tried to rectify that. But on the offensive side of the ball, it is going to be critical. And look, I think my biggest concern is not going to be the run. I think they will find a way to complement that. I think they will find a way to make it a much more functioning aspect of their offense. I think my concern, which I'm sure we're going to get onto a bit more now, is the offensive line, just the huge mystery that is the offensive line, and how that will impact the quarterback, who, for me, is a player who was shown, and I did a little bit of homework before this.
Nice.
It's shown to be quite a streaky player. Would you like the homework that I've done? Shall I provide it now?
Yeah. Let's transition to offense. We can go back and forth, but yeah, let's do it.
So I just had a feeling that, watching Geno Smith, I think he's a streaky player, and I think he's always going to be a streaky player. And I sort of just wanted to have a look at how it is, what I think are his three most impactful seasons in his career. The first was his final year at West Virginia. And I remember that year very, very well. In his first 6 games of that final season in college, he threw 25 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. His college passer rating on average was 183.4, and his completion percentage was an excellent 76.5. He was the expected number 1 overall pick. He was the Heisman leader. People were talking about West Virginia as a national championship contender. They went into Texas, beat Texas. It was a huge win. They were 5-1 after 6 games. In the next 7 games, he threw 17 touchdowns and had 6 interceptions. His passer rating dropped to 155.7. His completion percentage dropped to 69%. And West Virginia went 2-5 in that run. And that feels somewhat similar to the kind of amazing start and then difficult second half of the season, the kind of swings we've seen with him in Seattle. So in his first 8 games of 2022, and I know PFF is not the be-all and end-all by any stretch, but it is a way to sort of measure how someone has analyzed his performance. His PFF rating in the first 8 games of 2022, average of 75.8, 2.2 big-time throws per game, 1.2 turnover-worthy plays per game. Then in his final 10 games, the PFF rating drops quite considerably, 63.9 from 75.8. Big-time throw average drops from 2.2 to 1.8. His turnover-worthy play average jumps from 1.2 to 2.1. That's a sizable jump. There's a big difference there between the start of the season and the second half of the season. And then the most recent season we've had, he didn't have a great first 8 games. His PFF rating average of 68.1. He averages 1.5 big-time throws a game, and he averages 1.6 turnover-worthy plays per game. But in the final 7 games, it's the opposite of those other 2 seasons. His PFF rating jumps to a very good 75.2. His big-time throw average is a huge jump because from 1.5 to 2.8, it nearly doubles in the final 7 games. And his turnover-worthy plays drop from 1.6 to 1.2. This is a player that, they are really the 3 main seasons of his career. And in the 3 seasons, he has had some excellent football for a long stretch. And then he's had a run of games where it dips. He either starts poorly and then grows, last year, or he starts extremely strongly and then the performance dips. And I suspect something similar will happen again this season. And I don't think they've improved the offensive line well enough to prevent that from happening, in my opinion.
What do you think about that, Griff?
I definitely don't deny that there's been streaks of better statistics, streaks of average statistics, streak of below average statistics, at least if you're just even looking at the last 2 seasons. It's kind of tick-tacky, but I might use different semantics than streakiness. I mean, his stats have been streaky, but I think in doing my best to isolate Geno's role in those statistics, I don't know if he's been streaky. I think more so, I mean, this might be a hot take. I would argue that like this past season, like we have the first half and the second half difference, right? I think more or less he was the same player, and it's just circumstances around him changed just minutely enough that unlocked different results. And you can take that as defending him and saying that, well, he was actually always that good, but he was being filled by a supporting cast. Or you can take it the other direction and say that he's not good enough to elevate a supporting cast that's just below it. And in my opinion, take that in either direction. The reason why I don't think he is intrinsically streaky is that when comparing 2023 first half to second half, he didn't improve in every single area. He didn't improve across the board. If he was average in every category and then improved to well above average in every category, I then personally would subscribe to the idea that he's streaky. But his statistics in the areas the first half of the season that are less sensitive to the supporting cast, so like play action, for example, that kind of takes the pass rush out of it. His statistics in play action first half of the season, second half of the season were stable. Like it didn't improve, it didn't become worse. On early downs, pure drop back, they were elite the first half of the season, then elite the second half of the season. He didn't improve in those areas. They remained the same. The only areas that improved were third downs. He went from 32nd to about 10th, at least by EPA and success rate and stuff. And then red zone, he went from like 30th to, I think he was like 8th in success rate throwing inside the 20 the second half of the season. Those are 2 areas that are, you can't hide your O-line, basically. You get Abe Lucas back in there. Now, the O-line was still trash the second half of the season, but it was improved just enough to where the early down performance, the outside of the red zone performance catches up, or rather the third downs in red zone catches up to those other areas. So I think he was actually, intrinsically speaking, very consistent, but the results are a function of the other things. So you can view that as a tacit defense of Geno, but you can also say, like, well, I'm saying he's also not good enough to overcome O-line play of that caliber for a whole season. So take it in either direction. But so what that means for me is, regardless of how good Geno is or isn't, if the O-line is simply better than whatever arbitrary threshold, then you're going to get the results that you saw the second half of the season. And that's what it all comes down to me for me. So,
yeah, the other thing I'd throw in there, Rob, because I acknowledge the kind of streakiness that you're talking about. I've observed some of that. I would say that Russell Wilson was streaky as well. I mean, the end second half of 2015 was, I thought, the dawn of a new version of Russell Wilson. We never saw that version of him ever again. We saw the beginning of 2020, like he just went off and then, disappeared and became one of the least productive quarterbacks in the league. So he had a lot of variance to his game. And I think what that really equates, where that translates to me is, how good is the play caller? How good is the scheme? How good is the offense overall to be able to handle the different defenses that they're facing, the different game plans that are come against them, the different strengths of opposing teams? Like how solid holistically is that offense to be able to handle those things? And I think that the Seahawks offense, certainly for the last 2 years, and I think this is kind of where Griff is going, hasn't been solid enough to be able to allow somebody to be, you could say Kenneth Walker has been super streaky in the same period of time, because that team just has not been able to do one thing consistently well, seems like for a long time. Do you agree with that?
I completely agree with that, and I think that's the main thing. I also, I've kind of got this is one of the theories I have with John Schneider. He seems to, I don't know, like, without being able to sort of talk to John Schneider about this, it's hard to sort of get any sort of clarity as to what he's actually looking for. But I do think for him, I think he wants a quarterback just basically based on the quarterbacks he's been connected with having interest in, and even to the extent like Drew Lock was a very mobile. He scrambled around a lot at Missouri. Geno's a good athlete, but he's never really been a scrambling quarterback. I think he wants a quarterback that can mitigate some pressure being given up by an offensive line. And look, that would work hand in hand with his seeming disinterest in investing in the guard position, for example, that he wants somebody who can move around and not have to worry too much about that. And I think that's part of the issue. I think if the Seahawks had a great offensive line, let's say they've been able to bring in, let's say that next offseason, like Geno has a decent year and they say, right, we're going to give Geno an extension. They bring in Creed Humphrey, who's a free agent. Let's say the Chiefs allow him to escape from Kansas City. And then let's say they brought in somebody of the quality of Joe Thuney, who Kansas City spent a lot of money on. Then all of a sudden, I think you could think, well, actually, now they've got an offensive interior. And let's say Charles Cross takes a jump. And I know there's a lot of ifs coming in here, but something they've got an offensive line that you think, wow, that's a really good looking offensive line. I think there's absolutely no reason why Geno Smith couldn't put up all the numbers that you'd want him to put up. I think with this offensive line looking as it is, it's going to be very hard to do that. You bring up Russell Wilson. It's a great point. Russell was very, very streaky. Russell in his peak was a great scrambling quarterback and could move around and get away from some of that pressure. As he got older, that disappeared and he became a liability in the pocket sometimes. And I just pulled up Josh Allen's passing sort of numbers on PFF. And I think this is the interesting thing because the Bills, I had a look, they ranked the Bills O-line as the 22nd best going into the last season. And this is kind of the thing is that Allen has bad games. He had a really bad game in week 1 against the Jets. He had a bad game against the Broncos when they lost at home to Russell Wilson and Denver. He had a bad game at home against New England. But those games kind of like he's quite consistent. He doesn't have like a run of 5 games where you think, the numbers have really dipped there. He will have games in his grades are in the 80s, 90s for like 5 games in a row. Then he'll have a 65 game. Then it's 90 and 80 and 90. Then he'll have a 58. So he has bad games. Every player will have bad games. I think this is the difference between Geno and maybe the best of the best is that they will have the odd bad game. Mahomes has not had an undefeated season. Josh Allen certainly hasn't. But they are able to, whether it's through scrambling, whether it's just being able to play through the issues that your team has, they can still somewhat get the job done. I think Geno requires that kind of environment that's a little bit more in his favor consistently to avoid having the 5-6 game stretch where the numbers dip. And this, for me, is more of an O-line conversation than a Geno conversation because the point I made at the start was I don't think they've done enough on this offensive line to provide the kind of environment where Geno can avoid having a 5-6 game stretch again where things maybe look a bit muddled. But I still expect, because of the talent on the offense and because I have a lot of faith in Grubb and Scott Huff, I still expect Geno to have an 8-game stretch where he looks extremely competent as well. And I expect the offense to be a nice complement to the defense for the most part.
Yeah. I mean, Griff, when I think about this piece and it always ends up being Geno-centric, but I think about it more about the whole offense. I mean, Geno is asked to work behind not only a young offensive line, but then an injured and under-talented one that was pretty dysfunctional last year. And to do it without a running game that was particularly consistent or reliable. And you probably disagree with this, but I also think a play caller who often left him out to dry without outlets. There was a lot of plays where they would send receivers. Everyone was downfield, and there was no hot reads for Geno if things broke down. So whether he could scramble or not, there wasn't really an opportunity for him to really take the pressure off. And I don't think they had an elite quick game receiver on the roster. Like they would use JSN as a bubble screen guy, even though that's not necessarily his strength, but they didn't have somebody, and none of them were guys that were quickly getting open. Tyler Lockett used to be that kind of guy. He's not really as much anymore. JSN should be, but was not as much last year. There's a lot of pieces to that were like longer developing plays, a lot less reliance on the run game, a lot less, and so they had to he had to overcome, I think, quite a bit to be effective last year. And I guess my curiosity there is, we spent so much time talking about the pass protection, but what's the story to be said that this could be a better running team? What's the story to be said that this can be a team that has better options in short yardage situations other than just deep balls? Do you see that in Grubb's offense? Do you see that in the types of players that they brought aboard?
Well, I mean, I might say I would offer, I think DK Metcalf is a good quick game receiver, but it's more so he's one of the best slant route runners in the league.
Yeah.
And slants is quick game. That's 3-step drop from shotgun, technically a 1-step drop. But here's the thing, and this relates to the middle of the field discourse last year. When you have DK Metcalf on your team, you're going to see a lot of too high. And when you see a lot of too high, 80% of the time, the leverage of the underneath defenders is going to be inside leverage. And when you have an O-line that doesn't let you drop deeper than, say, a 3-step or a 1-step drop from shotgun, that means you can't run in-breaking quick game. So if you want to run in-breaking stuff against too high, you need to access your 5-step drop offense, but they didn't have an O-line that could accommodate that. So they were left with running outbreaking quick game. They were left with quick game, and they were only left with outbreaking quick game. It's kind of a curse with having really good deep ball receivers on your team, and also combined with having an incompetent O-line. So that was the conundrum that Waldron had that he was scheming around. He can't run in-breaking quick game, and people are faulting him for that. But if he did do that, Geno's throwing picks all day long. You're throwing it right into the teeth of the defense. So that said, their numbers throwing lower than 10 yards outside the numbers were elite. I think even Salk posted that or said that, read that out to Carroll. I think there was adaptations to it, but it's, I mean, again, those issues kind of dried up in the second half of the season anyway. I think where they actually had their main problems in their dropback game was really their 5-step offense. The O-line just absolutely killed them. They were forced with running a lot of half field reads because full field progressions simply take more time. So when you look at the tape, you see you have one deep, one third level receiver, one second level receiver, and then you're wondering, okay, well, where are the remaining options? Well, when you're running half field options, you have less guys in the real progression. It's more like pick a side, and then if that side is no one's open, then you're kind of in trouble. So it's a roundabout way of me saying that I think the core issue goes back to the offensive line. That said, they did like you said, they did run a lot more screens this year. I mean, their numbers on running screens,
they're pretty good at it.
They were pretty good at it.
Mm-hmm.
I know we wanted to see JSN be used downfield a little bit more, but it's if he's going downfield, then that means they're using DK less downfield, Tyler less downfield, with an O-line that the O-line can't accommodate everybody going downfield. So, I mean, it was kind of a conundrum, like a negative feedback loop. I mean, I think with Grubb, though, relating this, I mean, Grubb will have a similar conundrum if his O-line can't protect for their 5-step drop game. Where things might be different is that while Waldron isn't afraid of RPOs, Grubb embraces them big time. And that can be a potential antidote to an O-line that can't protect and also wanting to diversify what you're doing in quick game. A lot of OCs don't like quick game. They'd rather RPO. Grubb likes both. He had a high volume RPO, high volume quick game. That's something that Grubb might have to lean into more than he would want in the NFL level. He doesn't have he's not taking UW's offensive line with him, right? He has equivalent receivers. He doesn't have an equivalent O-line. So I'm very curious to see how he adapts to that. I don't think he'll have any problems though. I think as we evaluate Grubb, I think Grubb will do a great job with the variables he has to play with. It's just how inherently restrictive are those variables. I think the number one thing that the single most important variable that the entire team is hinging on is Abraham Lucas's health. I think that him staying on the field will have the most impact, more impact than any player except for Geno himself, probably, as far as what the fortunes will be for the offense. So
I think that a lot of folks would say that. And Rob, I think we all agree the fortunes of this team on offense are going to hinge again on whether they got enough out of this offensive line, which I 100% agree with you. They did not put as much into it as I had hoped for. I don't like having to try to make the case that Laken Tomlinson's going to return to form from 2 years ago or whatever. I mean, hopefully he does, but would I have felt better if it was Zeitler or like there's some other guys that maybe made an easier case to be made? Sure. I was a Jonah Jackson personally. That was my guy. But in any event, I think that there's data that suggests that the tackle play in general, Abe Lucas and Charles Cross, is a bigger issue for this team from a pass protection perspective than people even realize. We talk a lot about interior offensive line. Most of the pressure came from the tackles last year. But I think what I'm interested in, Rob, is can this team be a better run team this year? Are they? And it goes beyond the offensive line. Can Pharaoh Brown, teamed with AJ Barner, be a better pair of run blocking tight ends than Colby Parkinson was last year, for example? Can Zach Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker take their next steps? Can Kenneth Walker learn a little bit more about how to hit the hole instead of freelancing on every single play? And like, is there a chance here that plus the scheme that Scott Huff and Ryan Grubb are going to bring in, can the run game be a top 5 run game? Like, is that possible? Can Christian Haynes elevate the interior play? Like, is that even in the realm of possibility? Because if that's the case, then I'm going to tell you, if this offense can be a top 5 run game, I think that it's going to be hard for the defense to actually improve as much of this as this offense. That's how much I think that would change the fortunes of this team overall. What's your thought there?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, everything that you've said there resonates. I think perhaps the point on Ken Walker resonated the most because it's something you forget about because it's been a while since we watched a game. But it'd be great if he could just sort of stick to his his keys and cut off them and explode rather than dancing around and trying to make things happen or not just taking what was there. So, yeah, I think if the running game can really come together, I think with the tackles, you make a great point. I was talking to Jason Puckett about this the other day, is that when you actually think about it, like not everyone would agree that the Niners have got a very good offense. They've got a very good running game. They're very effective. They've obviously got very talented players. But if you actually look at their offensive line, it's Trent Williams and 4 Jacks. It's not as if they have a murderer's row of offensive linemen in San Francisco, yet it works because of the fact they have a great tackle and excellent scheming with a very accomplished offensive play caller. And you just wonder, look, can Charles Cross take the jump that we all want him to take? Can Abe Lucas get back out there? And nobody should expect him to be fantastic in his first year back after a long layoff, but can he be competent? Can he be not a liability, let's say, to provide the Seahawks with 2 tackles who can allow everything else to function so that, yeah, the quarterback can be protected, the running game can thrive. And I think the point that you made very early on is a great point. I actually totally agree with you, and it's something that probably deserves to be shouted out, is that the defense could go from 30th or whatever it is to 15th, and that'd be great. But for the offense to become a top 5 offense is a more important thing because I just assume the defense can't be any worse. I assume that the Seahawks are going to find some improvements there. If the offense could actually go to being a really potent, one of the league's best units with all of the talent that they have at the skill positions, that puts the Seahawks in a different place. That puts the Seahawks in a dangerous team territory. And again, to come back to one of the other points I was making, when you actually, it's very easy to overrate some other teams. And I think that exercise we did last week, and to have a look at if we actually spent as much time doing a draft board for every single team in the league, which would take forever, but if you did it, we'd probably find that some of the teams that everybody's talking about, they probably just have 2 or 3 star players that everybody latches onto. And that's what the Seahawks are missing. In terms of pure depth of talent, I think the Seahawks are well stocked. And I truly believe that this coaching staff can turn some of these players into stars. Perhaps the one that they drafted in the first round this year can get there quite quickly. So I'm very optimistic for this season and having a decent season. Much more optimistic than I would have been if the status quo would have remained.
All right, we're gonna close on this. I want to hear from both of you. Wildly speculative, wildly early in June 9th of 2024. If this team was, as I mentioned before, they were 17th in scoring on offense last year, and they were 25th in points allowed, what will be their rankings this year? Griff, you go first.
7th in scoring offense, and then I'll go 14th in scoring defense.
Okay, Rob.
I'm going to be give an optimistic June the 9th prediction of 10th and 10th for both.
I like that. I like that a lot. I'm going to go 8th on offense, and I'm going to go. Actually, scratch that. I'm going to go 4th on offense. I think Ryan Grubb's going to take the league by storm. Top 5. They're going to go 4th on offense, and I think that they are going to be 9th on defense. We're going to have 2 top 10 units. That's where I am right now at my peak of optimism before the depths of despair have hit us. So, yeah, I this is really helpful to kind of hear you guys go through the different aspects of the both sides of the ball and how much we think they're going to be better. But this is pretty clearly you're going to hear people talk nationally and even in Seahawksville about this team maybe taking a step back. I don't think the three of us, I don't think any of us see that. And where it ends up with the wins and losses, who knows? You don't know the quality of the opponents till you play them in any given season. But this team should be better. There's almost every reason to believe this team should be better than it was a year ago. I want to thank Rob Staton at Rob Staton Seahawks Draft Blog. Rob, what do you have coming up? Anything coming up on your side in the next week or two?
Yeah, I really need to write some things. So I will do some writing. Things have quietened down with the day job. So for people not in Europe, before Euro 2024 starts and begins a month-long, hopefully a month-long stress for me, if England get that far, I better write something. So I'm going to try and write something this week.
Awesome. People should check that out at Seahawks Draft Blog. And Griff, at C Mike Spin Move, 2 S's in there, C Mike's possessive spin move. Anything coming up on Seattle Overload people should be aware of?
I think we're going to look at some tape of young players that played last year. We're going to dive into Devin Witherspoon, Derek Hall, like the year 1, year 2 players, and try to project and or predict what they do in their respective year 2 and year 3. So, and what we can expect there.
Well, let me know. Give me a shout on Twitter if you figure out how Derek Hall is going to be something that I'm going to care about in 2024, because I didn't love the pick when it was made, and I certainly didn't love the pick through last season. So it would be great news if you find something to hang our hats on. I'll be looking out for that. As far as here on Hawk Blogger Mornings, tomorrow morning, at least as we currently scheduled, Ray Roberts is going to join the show. A true Seahawks legend, former top 10 pick at left tackle. We're going to talk about the offensive line. I'm also working to get Duke Manyweather on the show, also an offensive line guru. Talk to him about the Seahawks offensive line. And then Wednesday, Maura Dooley of Seattle Sports will join Real Hawk Talk. So Wednesday evening, we got a bunch of guests coming on this week. Should be good conversations, and I've got more in the works beyond that. So thanks again, Griffin Sturgeon. Give him a follow, Rob Staton, and all of you for tuning in. Please give the show a like and click subscribe. Until next time, I'm Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Hawk Blogger. This has been another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings.